All right, today we're diving into one of history's greatest cold cases, the disappearance of the Indus Valley Civilization. We're talking about a society that was just as advanced as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, but then it just vanished.
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For something like 700 years, this civilization was absolutely thriving. They built these incredible cities, had a peaceful society, and then nothing, silence. The cities were empty, the people just seemed to fade away. So what on earth happened? Let's dig in.
To really get what was lost here, we first need to understand just how incredible the Indus Valley Civilization actually was. We're talking about a period from around 2600 to 1900 BCE, and honestly, in so many ways, they were a world ahead of their time.
Just take a look at this. The level of planning is just mind-blowing. They had some of the world's first planned cities, laid out in a grid. The houses were built with uniform, baked bricks. And get this, they had complex, covered sanitation systems. We're talking sewers, centuries ahead of most other cultures. They even had standardized weights for trade, and maybe most fascinating of all, there's almost no evidence of war. This was no primitive group. This was a seriously sophisticated urban culture.
Okay, so now that we know just what was at stake, it's time to open up the case file. We're going to line up the main suspects, all the leading theories that try to explain why this amazing civilization collapsed.
Our first suspect is a big one, a force of nature that has rewritten human history again and again, a massive shift in the climate. The enemy here wasn't another army, it was the environment itself.
And the evidence for this theory is really persuasive. Scientists have found that the monsoon rains, which were basically the lifeblood for their farms, started to get weaker and less reliable. This led to long, punishing droughts. And the math here is pretty simple, right? No consistent water means no food. With food shortages becoming a major problem, people really had no choice but to leave their incredible cities behind just to survive.
Now, that climate shift had another, possibly even more devastating effect. It helped cause the disappearance of a huge river that was the backbone for so many of their settlements. You see, a lot of the biggest Indus cities were built along a huge river called the Saraswati. But it looks like tectonic shifts, the actual ground moving, caused the river to change course and eventually dry up completely. Can you imagine your main water source just gone? The impact would have been catastrophic. It would have crippled farming, destroyed trade routes, and forced a huge number of people to migrate away from the now empty riverbanks.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. We just talked about drought and a vanishing river, so this next suspect is gonna sound a little strange. It's the exact opposite problem. Not too little water, but way, way too much.
And this just shows you how complex this mystery really is. While some parts of their world were drying out, archaeologists digging in cities like Mohenjo Daro have found layer after layer of silt. That's clear proof that the city was hammered by massive, repeated floods. Just think about having to rebuild your home and your city over and over again. At some point, you just give up and move somewhere safer, right?
Our last major suspect isn't about a natural disaster, but a financial one. What if the whole thing came crashing down because their economy just fell apart?
The Indus people were amazing traders. Their trade networks went all the way to Mesopotamia. But when we look at records from Mesopotamia, we see that over time, trade with the Indus Valley just dwindled and then stopped. Losing those key trade partners would have been a huge blow to their economy. Without that flow of goods and wealth, the big cities slowly started to shrink, becoming smaller, more isolated farming villages.
Now, before we get to the verdict, we have to talk about the original prime suspect. For decades, this was the story everyone believed, a dramatic, violent, and brought on by outsiders.
So the old theory went like this. Nomadic warriors, sometimes called Aryans, swept down from the north and completely destroyed the Indus civilization. It's a dramatic story, but modern evidence just doesn't back it up. Archaeologists have looked everywhere. There are no signs of a massive war, no layers of ash from burned-down cities, no mass graves from a huge battle. So it's safe to say this suspect has been officially cleared.
Okay, so with the invasion theory off the table and with all this evidence pointing to climate change, dried up rivers, floods, and a failing economy, what really happened? It's time for the verdict.
When you hear about all these disasters, you might picture a really sudden, violent end, right? A single terrible event that wiped them out. But is that what the evidence tells us?
The answer, after decades of research, is a very clear and simple no. This was not some overnight apocalypse.
The end of the Indus Valley wasn't one single event. It was a slow-motion collapse that happened over centuries. You can think of it like a domino effect. It all starts with climate change, which weakens the whole system. That leads to rivers drying up in one place and catastrophic floods in another. This environmental chaos makes farming and trade impossible to sustain. And the final result isn't a massacre. It's a slow, gradual migration, with people just abandoning the cities that can no longer support them and moving to smaller villages.
So why does solving this 4,000-year-old mystery matter so much today? Well, because the story of this silent, slow decline has a really powerful lesson for every single one of us. When you boil it all down, the fate of this incredible civilization is a huge cautionary tale. They built a world that was unbelievably advanced, but in the end, they couldn't overcome the changes in the very environment they depended on. Their story is a powerful reminder of how critical it is to live in balance with the natural world. And that's really the final heavy question we're left with. The Indus Valley people had urban planning, global trade, incredible infrastructure, and yet they faded away. If a society that was so far ahead of its time could be brought to its knees by environmental change, it forces us to take a hard look at our own vulnerabilities today and to ask ourselves what we need to do to make sure our story has a very different ending.